The big engines had finally seen sense. The fat controller had them shut up while he bought a new engine. Now that Percy was around to shunt their trains, and they had learned their lesson, everything ran much smoother. Percy got the hang of the yards at Tidmouth quickly. This made him somewhat puffed up in the smoke box, as Henry would soon find out.
I know this yard like the back of my buffers. You should be thankful I've come.
Henry scoffed.
Anyone would think we're being ungrateful. Just remember this, youngster. Us proper big engines pull the weight around here. And yes, while you do shunt our trains, remember that we take the brunt of the work.
And when his guard blew his whistle, he puffed away. Percy was indignant.
Who does he think he is, calling me youngster? I'll show him who can pull trains.
And he rushed away to collect more trucks. Next day, Henry was due out with a goods train, but was not steaming fast enough. No matter how much Welsh coal was put in his firebox, he wouldn't start. Percy saw his chance. He approached the shunter.
Excuse me, could you couple me up to these? The fat controller says I am to take these instead of Henry.
The shunter scratched his head and looked at the driver. I suppose the fat controller told him while I was getting me coffee earlier, he said. Alright then. Suppose if it's controller's orders, the shunter said. And he fastened Percy's coupling to the trucks. It was a long train, around 20 heavy trucks of ballast set for Crovan's Gate. This was no load for a small engine like him to carry such a distance, but Percy had forgotten this in his ego. Once the guard blew his whistle, waved his flag, and jumped into the brake van, Percy slithered out of the yard as to not alert attention. He struggled for miles.
Ooh, this is heavy.
He groaned through Edward's station. Edward wasn't there to bank if something went wrong, but all the same, Percy creaked on. By the time he reached the hill, he felt almost completely out of breath. The trucks held him back, and though the driver had his regulator wide open, his wheels slipped fiercely. Percy grunted. At last the driver gave up. But Percy was stuck on the hill, not able to reverse. The guard ran down the hill and up to the station. The fat controller found Henry.
Percy's stuck on the hill. You're the only engine available. Henry, will you run and fetch him? And take the trucks the rest of the way?
By now Henry was sizzling nicely, and was now steaming.
Stuck, is he? Will do, sir.
He chuckled and ran away. When he reached Percy, he crept alongside him.
Well, I must say I appreciate you trying to take my trucks for me, but I must say, I think you're in a bit over your smoke box, youngster.
Henry chuckled.
Now let's get you back to the yard so I can take this train on.
Henry coupled to the back of the train and slowly pulled it down the hill, back down to Edward Station. The fat controller stood at the platform.
Percy, I do not appreciate engines who play controller on my railway. If you can behave, I'll have to put you in the shed and Chummish will do your work. Chummish won't like leaving his branch line.
Henry chuckled.
No, indeed.
Percy returned to the yard. Meanwhile, Henry took the train on. He came to the sheds that night, early. Percy was looking glum. Henry felt guilty and sighed as he backed into the shed next to Percy.
You know, your work in the yard is perfectly serviceable.
Percy gazed at him.
Really? Do you think so?
Henry chuckled softly.
Well, no, I know so.
He looked around awkwardly.
And I'm... Well, I'm...
Percy looked at him puzzled.
Well, I'm sorry I was rude. I think you shunt the yard great. Better than Thomas, in fact.
Percy smiled and said,
Well, that was a long-winded apology, you great big softy.
Henry spluttered.
Well, I'm not so great at this apology thing.
He looked at his buffers.
You know, Gordon and I have this thing we call an alliance.
Percy looked confused.
What's an acclimate?
Henry corrected him.
Alliance. To put it in Gordon's words, you help me, and I'll help you. United we stand, together we fall.
Henry looked to see if Percy was following. He was, so Henry continued.
So, for example, if you don't tell Gordon or James about this conversation, I won't tell them you stuck on the hill. Got it?
Percy smiled.
All right, then.
Henry smirked.
You're not so bad, youngster.
But before Percy could hear, he had already drifted off to sleep.